first step in putting on the bindings is to make sure that everything is in good shape. I've taken the maple and moistened it and put it in the mold for a while so it'll hold its shape when we put it on the instrument here. And so now we just need to get everything in place so we can mark it and cut it to size properly. Make sure everything fits properly. I like to clamp it at the waist because that's, for sizing, that's the critical place to make sure that the curve of the bindings fits properly in that concave surface. I use brown tape for this because it doesn't stretch. It has excellent adhesion. It's strong, and the adhesive doesn't damage the wood when you take it off. So it's an ideal tape for this. Once we have everything in place where we want it, then we can mark the binding right at the midline there. So we can cut it at that point. I set it up in a board in my vise so that it can be vertical. And mark it with a square. I put a piece of a kitchen cutting mat underneath there to protect the body from the saw. Don't want any accidents. These little fine Japanese saws are wonderful for this. Now we have that in place, we can mark the maple. Use my fret nippers to cut the maple. Cut it a little bit long first just to make sure, and then just trim it slightly to get it so it's just perfect, so it lines up with the ebony binding. Done the other side the same way, and now we're putting on the binding on the other side, letting it overlap a bit. Here's a trick with the saw is that if you look at the reflection of the piece you're cutting in the saw, when it looks like it's running straight through and it's straight, then you know you're cutting square. So now we're ready to glue them on. They fit really well. I use fish glue because it gives me a little longer open time than hot hide glue does. I prefer hot hide glue, but for this purpose fish glue is good. I take my brown tape and I cut it in strips about 7 inches long and attach them to my bench there so I don't have to spend time cutting them as I go along. Apply fish glue to both surfaces of all the pieces. I always start at the tail first because that's critical, especially on the top where the other end is going to be underneath the fretboard. But I want the joint at the tail of the bindings to be as perfect as I can get it. So the trick here when you're putting your bindings on with tape is to press down first and then pull across to tighten it on. So press down, pull across. I give a fair amount of space on this for a couple of reasons. One is that I can see if I get the tape too tight, then you can't see whether you've got a good joint. But if you give yourself some space, you can get it pretty tight, and then I come back later and put more tape on just to make sure it's really clamped tight. When you get to the waist, I put a clamp on there. If you put tape on that concave surface, it has a tendency to tear. So the clamp works really well for that. So that all looks pretty good. So now we'll just put a little more tape on to make sure it's really held tightly in place. More tape for the other side. Get that joint good, press down, pull across. Be careful not to get that clamp too tight there. You don't want to damage your instrument. Sometimes you got to trim things a little bit as you go along, because it seems like when you have it taped really tight, sometimes you need a little more space to make it come out well. I don't trim the back with the nippers like that, the fret nippers, because that joint also shows, and I want a cleaner joint, so I use a sharp chisel if I have to do that. Press down, pull across. Some people use string to hold their bindings on, but for an ukulele it's such a small thing, I find the tape works just fine. So, see how it all looks? Looks good. So there you have it.